And welcome in to this edition of Broadcaster Hour. I'm Roger Hoover coming to you from South Carolina. We've got Kyle Crooks on the far side of the screen from Florida, and in the center of the screen from Chicago, Illinois, we have Andy Masur, the new play-by-play broadcaster for the Chicago White Sox on WGN Radio. And Andy, it's great to have you with us. How's everything going on the south side now?
Everything is good. We're getting ready for some more warm weather here in Chicago, which is perfect because it's supposed to be baseball season, and kind of odd that we're starting at the end of July, but we're getting ready to go.
Yeah, we're only a week away from what will be opening day at Guaranteed Rate Field, and I'm sure you're excited for your first opening day as the play-by-play voice, the lead play-by-play broadcaster for the White Sox. But just what is this season going to be like for you guys, getting ready to call 60 games all from the same booth, even though a lot of times the White Sox will not be on the field below you?
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. We really don't know what to expect, having to call the road games from the home booth and 60 games as opposed to 162. So it's going to be interesting to see strategies. It's going to be interesting to see how teams get off to whatever start they get off to, whatever kind of moves they're going to make. It's really anybody's game. I mean, it's just so hard to predict what's going to happen. I've been asked so many times, hey, do they have what it takes to get to the playoffs? I'm like, well, yeah, if they get off to a good start, sure, why not? I mean, I can see it happening. There's a lot of other teams that are going to try to do the same thing. And, at the end of the day, you may end up finding a team that you never thought was going to be in the mix to actually be in the mix because they got hot and their pitchers got some confidence and their offense came to life. And, again, who knows? It's going to be interesting. But I'll tell you what, we're going to approach it the same way that we did for 162. I'm doing the same prep. I'm getting ready to do an exhibition game on Sunday. Strangely enough, it's going to be at Wrigley Field, and we'll be 8 miles down the road calling the game from the other ballpark. So, but I'm getting ready for that, and I'm just going to look at it as this. It's still a 9-inning baseball game. 10 innings with the runner at second base, which would be hard to get used to for this year. But we're just going to do it the same. I mean, it's baseball, and it's a lot of fun.
How do you expect it's going to go when you're calling those road games off the monitor and you're trying to judge fly balls and just little different things of the actual play-by-play that are going to be so different, and it's going to take a radical adjustment, isn't it?
Yeah, it's going to take a lot because, luckily I was able to do a couple of these types of broadcasts when I worked for the Big Ten Network back in 2015 and 16. We didn't travel with baseball or softball. Did all our games from the studio in Chicago, but it was a great setup because you had a big program monitor in front of you. And then just to the right of it, there was a monitor that had all the cameras, so I could see the cameras moving. And if I had trouble picking up the ball on the program monitor, I could find it on the other one, and I could find the runners on the other one. So I'm not exactly sure what the setup is going to be. There's been a lot of talk about different things that we're gonna get. I think we're going to get a 2-monitor setup. I don't know what's going to be on the one monitor. MLB is doing what it can. I mean, I know they have a stat broadcast program kind of like that we're going to be able to have in the booth, and they say within a split second, we're going to be able to read what's going on at the ballpark. So in case you miss something, you could go right to it and then go, all Ronald Reagan on it and pretend like you saw it and call it from what you see on the screen. It's going to take a little adjusting, I have a feeling. But, I was telling people it was interesting. We had a Zoom call with all the American League broadcasters the other day because everybody was kind of concerned. And, I mentioned the fact that I had done this stuff for the Big Ten Network, and people were asking me a bunch of questions. And I said, listen, here's the one thing we have going for us. With no fans in the stands, you don't have to beat the roar of the crowd to the play. So you can actually sit back and almost like you're doing TV, sit back maybe a couple extra seconds just to make sure you got the play right before you actually have to call it, because there's not going to be fans screaming or reacting to it in the background. So if there's one grace or saving grace of that whole thing with no fans being allowed in the stands, that might be it.
In watching a lot of the inter-squad games, they have that fake crowd noise piped in, and it does sound normal. Just having, I think I saw Joe Davis tweet this out the other day, just having that hum underneath. It sounds, you don't even notice it. Is that something that's going to be pumped into both the TV and the radio broadcast? That's something that you welcome, just the fake crowd noise you're going to have?
Yeah, I think they're going to do it at the ballparks. I think MLB is kind of mandating that teams do it, and I think there's actually going to be somebody whose job it is to appropriately react. So I don't know how quickly that's going to be done, or how accurately, or how it's going to sound. But even for those games at the Big Ten Network, I always asked our producer to pump the crowd, just the murmur into my headphones, because then you felt like you were there. And it's going to be really strange when you're looking out at a field and there's nobody on it and you're calling a game. So, I mean, as more normal as they can make it, I'm all for it. But again, I don't want it to sound stupid. I want it to, because people that are listening, they know there's no fans in the crowd. I mean, everybody knows, everybody's heard the news. It's been that way for a few months. So, I mean, it's almost counterproductive, but at the same time, I can see why they want to make it somewhat normal to people who are watching or listening, because, there's always this, the trap that a broadcaster will fall into. And you guys know what I'm talking about if there's a dead audience out there, there's no crowd noise or anything like that. You tend to talk so much because you want to cover that up. Well, you don't have to do that in baseball because it's such a long, drawn out situation. So even if there's no crowd noise, I'm going to take some breaks. I mean, it's just the way I do things, and I think it's just the way that baseball fans get used to guys that are calling games the way they call it. So if it's there, great. If it's not there, it's business as usual as far as I'm concerned.
A little bit later on, we'll really dive into your prep under normal circumstances for a Major League Baseball game. But just right now, with what it's going to be like both home and road for the White Sox and what a broadcaster is able to do, how does that change your preparation coming up on a daily basis?
Well, it's interesting because we're not allowed in the clubhouse, so I don't have any personal interaction with any of these players. The only interaction we have, and the team's been doing a great job with this. I mean, they have the manager and at least one, maybe even two, sometimes three players after the workouts or after the inter-squad game on Zoom, and we never have to hang up. I mean, they're just simultaneous. So, I'm listening to that kind of stuff. But, there are questions that I want to ask that aren't really appropriate for the large setting, because I don't want to give away a lot of the stuff that I'm thinking about that maybe using on the air. So what we're trying to do right now is we're trying to work it out with the powers that be, especially with the manager, at least to get some kind of an audience with him, whether it be on Zoom or from 18 feet away. I don't care, just to be able to get some information. Because as you guys know, I mean, you need to know which players are dinged up. So you don't criticize a guy for not hustling down the line at first. You need to know which pitchers he's trying to stay away from that day, so that if it comes up and that guy's spot is there and he doesn't go to him, I mean, at least we know, so we can kind of head off the criticism at the pass. And that's really important to me, because I want our guys to know that we're knowledgeable about our team and that we have this information because we're doing our homework. So it's going to make it a little more challenging, but you know what? I mean, we have to adapt. I mean, it's just the kind of thing it is. I mean, to complain about it is absolutely counterproductive, because it's just going to drag you down. So I'm looking at it this way. We're exploring uncharted territory here. So we have a real good chance now to do some excellent broadcasts, because we're pretty much the only game in town when it comes to folks sitting in their cars. I mean, that's it. I mean, you can't come to the game. You're not going to be watching TV from your car. So, I mean, we have the opportunity really now to seize upon the audience and do the best possible job we can under the circumstances. We have to roll with it.
And for you, you get to step into this lead play-by-play role with the White Sox under some bittersweet circumstances, with Ed Farmer passing away in April. Just what did you learn about being around Ed the last few years in your role as a pre- and the post-game host with the White Sox? And just what did you really enjoy the most about getting to be around him?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Bittersweet for sure, because, we'd love to have Ed around. His name's on the booth. It's going to stay on the booth, and it's his booth, So, I mean, I have no qualms with that, no problems with that at all, because Ed, in the short time that I really knew him, was excellent to me. I mean, he could have been anyway. I mean, he knew that I had done this before and that it was something that I still wanted to do. He could have felt threatened. He could have felt any way he wanted to, but he was pure class and just pure. He's just fun to be around. He was one of a kind. I mean, if you never got to meet him, it's a shame, because they don't make him like him. I mean, he was old school through and through. I mean, a kid that grew up on the South Side. Going to White Sox games at Old Comiskey Park, having a chance to pitch for them, representing them in the All-Star game, and then going ahead and becoming the broadcaster for this club for so long that, he is synonymous with the White Sox. And I know that. And, the thing I probably learned the most from him was probably nothing to do with the broadcast aspect of things. It was more the way that he dealt with people, and just the way that he was generous with his time and with advice and anything. And I've told this story a million times, and I'm going to tell it 1,000,001. I mean, Ed was the kind of guy who would give you the shirt off his back, and at the same time would be mad at you for not asking for the shirt, because he really wanted to give you the shirt, and he would be pissed if you didn't. So, I mean, he was just the kind of person that you really enjoyed being around. I had met him, quote unquote, when I was working with the Cubs. It was the Interleague Series. We came there, I believe it was 2005. And I was working with Pat Hughes and Ron Santo, and Ron, of course, with diabetes, had both legs amputated below his knee, was wearing prosthetics, and we were there in the middle of the summer. It was hot, and it was really, really massively hot out there. And I'll never forget Ed coming into our booth, just checking on Ron, making sure he was okay, making sure he had drinks, making sure he had food, making sure the air conditioning was right, the channel on the TV was turned to the right place. You know, they had a little system because the sun used to shine off the countertop right in your face, so they would put like folders down, manila folders down on the countertop to make sure that the glare wasn't so bad. And he would come in to make sure that everything was good. I mean, he didn't have to do that. I mean, he's broadcasting for the other club, first of all, and what's he doing? And I never forgot that. And the first day that I really officially met him, I reminded him about that, and he was impressed that I remembered. And as I've grown to find out, over the last couple of years, that's just Ed.
What were your years with the Cubs like, and working with another legend, Pat Hughes, and being in that pre and post role? You get to physically watch these guys go to work. So what did you learn from Pat over at Wrigley?
I learned a lot more from Pat than I really even believed that I did, because, you hear people enough, and then you go and do this for yourself, and then you start hearing them in you. So, you have to obviously make it your own. But the way that Pat approaches things, is prep, and he is knowledgeable. He is a student of the game. And if there's situations, that come about, you need to know the rules, because he was always on top of that stuff. He would be like, wait, that's a violation, and he would call it out during his play-by-play, because he knew so much about the game and about the rules and everything. So I kind of took that. And, the other thing that really stuck with me that I didn't realize stuck with me until I got to San Diego was his reverence for Ron Santo and treating an icon with absolute respect and kid gloves. I mean, because, Ron made tons of mistakes, and, Ron was not prepared for a lot of things, but nobody cared, because Ron was just there because he was the ultimate Cubs fan and people loved him. And Pat treated him so well and carried him through broadcast sometimes and set him up so well that, it was really appreciated by a lot of Cubs fans, because they would say to him, "We appreciate you taking care of number 10, and so when I go to San Diego, I've got two guys that have been there over 30 years when I get there, and Ted Leitner and Jerry Coleman. And I find that, Jerry Coleman is revered almost in the same light as Santo was in Chicago in San Diego. And, toward the end of Jerry's life, I mean, I actually called the last game with him that he ever called in September of 2013. And, I was doing a lot of games with him only. And I found myself being Pat, saying, all right, I know he's not prepared. Doesn't matter. Nobody out there cares that he's not prepared. So I shouldn't be bothered by it. I'm going to pull him through. I'm going to make him laugh. I'm going to, get him off his game every once in a while. And it worked. I mean, it worked really well. And I had to do the same thing when I came here to the White Sox booth, because Ed's in the same vein. I mean, Ed is that same guy. And the games that I got to work with Ed, it was the same way around. So, to kind of circle back, I mean, Pat taught me a lot about not just play-by-play, but just about how you work with your color commentator, how you bring in other people, and how you get prepared for a game and call it to the best of your ability. You're going to make mistakes. He's very self-deprecating. I find myself to be that way as well, because if you can't laugh at yourself, you can't laugh at someone else's expense either. And we know that these are live broadcasts, and that if you make a mistake, there's nothing you can do about it, but just either make fun of it or move on.
How long did it take you to find that personality factor in a broadcast? Because that's so important. When we're coming out, a lot of us sound almost robotic and a caricature of a broadcaster. How long did it take for you to find what you should sound like on the air?
It was probably 2008. I got to be honest with you, because I started doing a little fill-in play-by-play on the Cubs network in 03, and 03 through 06 is when I left. And then I started in San Diego in 2007. And, when I got to San Diego, like I said, there were two guys in the booth already that had been there a total of like 65 years. And, and Jerry had been there as a manager before that, and, in the front office. And it's just like, okay, well, what am I getting myself into here? I kind of felt almost like I shouldn't be personable, if that makes any sense, because I didn't want to take away from what these guys were doing, because people were so used to them and they weren't used to me. And it was a mistake. I mean, fully admit it was a mistake, because I was getting killed. I was getting crushed. New guys get crushed anyway, because you're new and you're not what they're used to. And in my case, I came from a big city, and San Diego. They want their own. They want people that are familiar with everything that they have. I mean, I studied. I knew. It wasn't even about that. It was just a strange voice to them. And I thank Ted and Jerry for welcoming me, because again, they could have, made it really tough on me, but they were great. And I think in 2008, I finally decided, you know what, I can't hold back. I got to just do what I do. And I've got a lot of sarcasm built into me. I've got some personality built into me. It's not always the funniest thing. You can ask my girlfriend. She laughs, and that's why I think that's why she's still with me, I think. But it's a good audience. But it's one of those kind of things where you have to start to do it, and you have to figure out a way to make it that it fits in the broadcast and it's not coming at the expense of any game. You do it in situations where you can do it, and obviously you shut up when it's a close game and it's the 8th or the 9th inning and it's the time runs at second base. You're not going to be making any puns or doing anything stupid. But I look at it this way now. I mean, I sit up in the booth, and whatever comes to my mind, there's a little bit of a filter, but then it goes out. And I'm thankful that DJ Darren Jackson, who I'm working with, he and I have had a chance to work together a couple times, more than a couple, about 35 times last year. Unfortunately, when Ed got sick, and he's the same kind of guy. And we'll sit there and bust on each other, but at the same time, it's just like we're calling a game, and I trust him implicitly to analyze situations because he played the game at a high level, and he trusts me to make the calls so that he can come in. So it's a great little relationship that he and I have developed over a real short period of time, and that's something I'm looking forward to as well, getting going.
Andy, going back a few steps to your college days, you went to Bradley University, and did you start doing some play-by-play then? What were some of your earliest play-by-play moments, and how did you start to build up some reps?
Basically, my earliest reps were in high school, believe it or not. I had a radio station in my high school at Maine East High School in Park Ridge, Illinois, and I was doing baseball, I was doing basketball, I was doing football. I mean, obviously, it was pretty bad. It was really, really rough, but we were doing it. And, I got a chance a couple of times in college to get hired to do a couple of high school tournaments that were being hosted in Peoria, and they were looking for Bradley students to do it. And through my association with the school, I got a couple of opportunities to do that. My path kind of skewed just because I tell a lot of people just to get on the air whenever you can, just to make yourself at least you can get some tape and people can actually hear what you sound like on the air. And I ended up in a whole different realm. I ended up starting off in top 40 radio, believe it or not. I was a DJ for quite a long time, and it's kind of hard to explain how I got into it. But in Peoria, they had a building in town. It was a CBS affiliate. It had an AM station, an FM station, and a TV station all in the same complex. It was like down the hall from each other. And at one point, I don't know how it happened, but I had 4 different time cards for 4 part-time jobs. It was AM, FM, TV, and copywriting. So I'd be walking up to the time card, and this was literally when you punched a card. I mean, you into the clock, and I was like standing there, boom, boom, and then I had to do another one, so I could go down to do my other job. So sometimes on Saturdays, I was there doing a shift on the AM station from 10 until 2, and the AM station was kind of like a full-service station, but they played a lot of sleepy elevator music. But it was a lot of opportunity just to talk, which was good. And then I go across the hall to do the top 40 station and do that for 4 hours from 2 to 6. And then I would take a dinner break, and then I would go down into the newsroom and floor direct for the 10 o'clock news. So I would tell the talent which cameras to look at. I would run the teleprompter. And by the time I was done, I mean, I had been there for 12 hours. And I didn't care because it was some of the best times that I've ever had in the business, not making any money. We were around a lot of people that were, my age and in similar situations. People to go out with, people to go have drinks with, and it was a lot of fun. So it eventually morphed into full-time top 40 DJ overnights and then nights, and then I left Peoria to come back to Chicago. And what I did, I worked for an outfit that was called Metro Networks, and it was basically a warehouse for those of us that were doing traffic reports for various Chicago stations. We were doing weather reports, news reports, sports reports. And I did traffic on one of the all news stations here, and it was back during the OJ trial. So I was in a perfect spot. I was doing midday traffic, and I maybe did like 3 traffic reports in my entire shift because they were carrying the OJ trial live. But there was a guy in that building, Jeff Joniak, who is now the voice of the Bears, who was the sports director for that outfit. And I kept bugging him. I'm like, listen, you got to give me a chance to get on the air to do sports. This is what I want to do. I know what I'm doing. I know you want to hear it. I'll give you an audition tape. He's like, okay, well, give me an audition tape one time a week, and make sure there's sound bites in there. And it wasn't as easy as today. We didn't have the computers to drop sound bites in. I actually literally had to record stuff off my VCR and then put it into a tape recorder and then get it over to another area and fire it while I was doing it. So it was not easy, but I was bugging him to the point where I was doing 3 or 4 of those audition tapes a week, and he was getting so far behind that he finally just said, okay, I'm going to put you on 7 to 10 on WBBM, which was an all-news station here as well. I did 1 shift there, and he liked it, and I was doing, from that point on, I was doing weekends on the old WMAQ, which was where the sports radio station is located now. But I was working 7 days a week, didn't care. That kind of evolved into me doing some stuff at what was then one-on-one sports radio. I think it evolved into Yahoo Sports Bleacher Report. I don't even know what it is now, but it was Sporting News at one point. But I worked with them when they were here in Chicago, and then I found out about the job at GN and got that, and that's where I really wanted to be. So I left there and started there in '99, and then just kind of from there, here we are.
Here you are, and now you're back on WGN getting to call the White Sox games there. And there are a lot of different paths to baseball play-by-play, and a lot of people say you got to go to the minors and kind of pay your dues there. A lot of people say go to the flagship station of the team you want to work for and just work your way up from there. Once you got through the door at WGN, what were some of the steps you took to eventually get to Wrigley Field and get to work with Pat and Ron?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it was basically that second round you talked about because, I got in there and I was the only sports reporter that they had at the time. So I was charged with doing the weekend pre and post game shows. And then during the week I was reporting on the team. So I'd be in the field. I would send back whatever the manager had to say at that point, whatever player. I used to do some of the interviews. So, I started slowly getting in with some of the players and it became a lot more comfortable. So that eventually, our guy that was doing the night show was doing some TV work as well. So I ended up doing a bunch of the night pregame shows. My boss, Dave Ennett, was doing the weekday day game starts, and he's also the sports director at the radio station. So there was a lot of times where things would come up, and he'd say, "Hey, can you fill in for me?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, absolutely, no problem." So being in a booth for that many times during a week, and I would sit in the booth during the game. I would help out Pat and Ron. I would listen to the overhead speaker and tell them what the scoring decisions were, what the subs were. I'd look up stuff for them, and it just kind of became, they looked to me, and I was in the booth, and I was a familiar face to these guys and a trustworthy face because I never would really steer them in a wrong direction. So the trust factor started to build, and then, when Santo got sick the first time, John McDonough, who was the marketing director at the time that went on to be the president of the Cubs and the Blackhawks, said, "Listen, we want to send you on the road to kind of keep an eye on Ron just to make sure that everything's okay. And if it's not, you can get the people that need to be there to take care of him, and you can also fill in for him." And I said, great. So that was really the start of it, because at that point, the station figured, well, why are we doing pregame shows from the studio when you're there? So I ended up doing all the pre and post game shows from the road. And then, it morphed into a little time on the air during play-by-play. And then, again, the rest, as they say, is history.
How did you morph that fill-in play-by-play opportunity with the Cubs pre and post then to San Diego? And the next point, I guess, my question would be, how tough was the move and moving to a whole different part of the country, trying to learn a new team, a new fan base, knowing that people are going to be critical of the new guy coming in? How did you handle all of that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I was only doing, I don't know if you guys realize, but I was only doing 3 outs for every time I filled in for Pat. It wasn't even a full inning. It was a half inning. And at that point, I would have taken 2 outs. I mean, you don't turn it down, obviously. And it was rough at the beginning. And, eventually, as the years kind of went by, I started to get better with reps and found enough tape to put together to send out to San Diego. It was a long process, 3 interviews to get the gig. And, as far as when I got it, it was a little bittersweet because, I grew up here. And I had never lived outside of the state of Illinois, and I was about to turn 40 when I got the job. And I thought to myself, all right, well, if not now, when? I mean, you gotta, you're getting an opportunity that only a certain amount of people in the entire world are getting to do. Get your rear end out there and take whatever comes your way. And it was nerve-wracking a little bit, moving out there not knowing a soul. Learning a different team, learning everything about it, closing up a house here, moving out there. And it was different. It was difficult at times, but I wouldn't change any of it because, even though it didn't work out the way I wanted it to work out in San Diego, it taught me a lot. It taught me a lot about how to deal with disappointment. And I still need to learn a little bit better how to deal with disappointment because I'm a human being and I still take some of it personally, even though I shouldn't, because it was nothing that I did. It was more of a business thing when a third ownership group came in and did whatever they wanted to do. I mean, I would still be out there if it wasn't for that. I really feel, but that's it's the kind of thing you have to look at yourself in the mirror and say, listen, again, if you're not going to do it now, you're never going to do it. And this is an opportunity that you can't pass up. So I took it. And yeah, the first year was a little rough, like I said, but after that, fans really started to take to me a little bit. I was very active on social media. I was very active in the Twitterverse, and also with the advent of podcasting and all that kind of stuff. I was doing a lot of their podcasts with them, and recognizing them. Luckily, I have an easy time recognizing people. Sometimes I don't remember their names all the time, but I at least know that I know them. And I think that that kind of ingratiated me a little bit with the fan base out there. So it was tough getting acclimated, but once you do something long enough, and once you're there long enough, it's just like riding a bike. You get up in the morning, you have breakfast, you go to the ballpark, you call a game, you come home. I mean, it's just kind of as simple as that.
And you mentioned in there, and it's important, and it's an important part of your story and many broadcasters' story, that the disappointment of sometimes situations are out of your control, but it's how you handle it and turn that into a positive. You go back to Chicago, you land back with WGN, and you get another major league opportunity with the White Sox. How did you turn that negative into a positive?
That's the question for the ages, because you know what, I don't think I handled myself real well at the beginning during that whole thing. It came to an end finally in January of 2014, but it had been brewing since the start of the 2012 season. I mean, there were some things going on behind the scenes that, were really angering me, and I had a hard time kind of disguising that anger. I generated at a couple of people, and I would tell everybody and anybody who would ask me who the people were, and it was probably not the right way to do it. No, not probably. It was the wrong way to do it. Because you never know who knows the person you're ripping on. And it makes you look bad. It makes you look petty. It makes you look stupid. It makes you look small. And I know that now. Obviously, I didn't know it then. And it was a nice lesson to learn from somebody out there that I really trusted, that I worked for at the university when I was doing some basketball games at the University of San Diego. Told me at a lunch engagement, he said, "You need to just shut your mouth." And I looked at him, I'm like, "What are you talking?" He goes, "Everything you're saying is getting right back to this guy because everybody in town knows him." And I go, it was kind of an awakening. And I was like, yeah, I guess I'm not doing myself any favors by making myself look that way. Didn't know it now. Didn't know it then. Certainly know it now. The only thing I was really angry about was the timing of the whole thing, because it really prevented me from trying to look for another job in the majors, because it was a week, 2 weeks before pitchers and catchers were reporting that had happened. But listen, they do. You have to learn that when somebody owns a team, they can do whatever the hell they want to do with that team, from the pitcher to the washroom attendant to the broadcaster. They can do whatever the hell they want. And until you realize that, you're going to be an angry person. Yeah, I was kind of angry when I came back, but the moral of the story is I left WGN the first time on really good terms. They were very happy for me and the opportunity that I got in San Diego. I offered to help them in their search. They were very appreciative of that, because it was kind of late in the game and I kind of left them a little bit in the lurch. So I felt kind of bad about it, and I really wanted to provide some assistance. I was available to the person that they hired, Corey Provis. I had about a 2.5, 3 hour conversation with him before their first spring training game, just to make sure he was on board and knew exactly what he had to do to get Ron whatever Ron needed, to get Pat whatever Pat needed, and to be himself in the booth. So I had about a 3 hour conversation with him about that, and we still talk about that to this day when we bump into each other. But I think that you had to leave that first job on that good of terms to be able to come back. I had no idea when this thing ended what I was going to do. So logically, I reached out to my radio family in Chicago. And lo and behold, they needed somebody, because the guy that was doing Cubs pre and post at the time was also doing Blackhawks pre, post, and intermission. And he was going to stay with the Cubs until the Blackhawks maybe made it to the Stanley Cup final. So I was pressed into duty during the hockey season, and I had never done hockey. I'm a huge hockey fan, but you guys know being a fan and doing the job is completely a different animal. So, I mean, luckily I was tutored by one of the former great Blackhawks, Troy Murray, who's our color analyst. And I laid myself on the mercy of his court by saying, listen, if I'm asking you fanboy questions, you guys slap me because I don't want to be fanboy. I want to be broadcast boy. And, he was telling me, and most of the time he was like, you're good. So it was nice. But, again, moral of the story is this, you kind of have to kind of go about your business and realize now, in some cases, it is you. I mean, sometimes, unfortunately, it comes down to the fact that somebody doesn't like the way you broadcast, or somebody doesn't like your style, or somebody doesn't like what you said. And yeah, okay, well, then that's something you got to look in the mirror about. In situations like I went through, is completely an ownership decision based on somebody that they wanted to bring in. And yeah, did I handle it poorly at the time? Absolutely. Do I know that now? Yes. Will I ever do that again? No. Lesson learned.
Yeah, one of the things, I think I saw it at an STAA Q&A that you had in the clip, eventually went on YouTube, and they talked about that transition, and you mentioned that in those first few months, before you would leave the house, before you did anything, you would do a couple of things to really make sure you're working on your craft at the time, whether that's updating your resume, looking at some clips, updating demo reels, things like that. Just how much of that helped you propel yourself into those future opportunities you did get?
Well, I think it did a lot because, I had to look at my resume and I had to figure out, okay, well, what am I going to feature here? I'm not going to go all the way back to the Cubs because, that's old news at this point. So, I had to really kind of beef up the San Diego stuff to, really be considered for anything here. And, I wanted to make sure I had the best stuff. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't missing something. I had time. So instead of going out and, hitting golf balls, which I did a lot, just, to relieve stress and to take pictures like you see behind me. I mean, that was kind of my solace and my get away from the whole situation. Yeah, I had to spend time on it because I wasn't done. I mean, I was not done by any stretch of the imagination. I may have felt it every once in a while, like, okay, well, it was a great run. Let's go find out what you're going to do next. And yeah, I mean, even in the time between 2014 and 2018, when the station got the White Sox again, I wasn't full time at the radio station. I actually took a job with a photography company and was going out and shooting high school sporting events and yearbook pictures. I went and taught at the Illinois Media School here. I taught a broadcasting class, sports broadcasting class with a couple of other guys. So, I was trying to find other ways to spark my brain and things like that. But basically at the end of the day, what it came down to is you got to do what I'm supposed to do. And what I'm supposed to do is broadcast games. And that's what I wanted to be. So I had to get back with the station. I had to get back with the team. I was sending out stuff left and right. I kind of felt like at times I was being overlooked for things because of whatever. You get conspiracy theories in your head, and that's where they are. They're in your head. I mean, it's just, okay, you're not qualified, or they're going some other direction. I mean, you have to deal with it, because if you don't, you're going to talk yourself into something else, and you're going to talk yourself into doing something stupid. So I just tried to maintain and just kind of keep a smile on my face as best as I could. I trusted wholeheartedly the people that I was working with at WGN because I had worked with them all before. Dave Ennett, one of my heroes in broadcasting, and one of the best bosses, if not the best boss I've ever worked for, because he hired you to do the job and trusted that you could do it and barely ever had to talk to you unless there was some huge problem. I never felt like I was being micromanaged or nitpicked. And, he hired me not once, but twice. So, I mean, I'm thankful and very grateful for him, doing that for me. And, now we get into the point where things start to open up, and he knew that I was really interested in getting back into the game. And when we got the White Sox, they brought me in and said, okay, if you're going to do the pregame show only this first year, because, we got guys we want to hear, and this guy, I'm like, fine, pregame show only, good. I can do the pregame show and leave after, 3 or 4 innings, or make sure each team gets a hit, because I'm never going to miss a no-hitter. I'm never going to leave a game before each team has a hit. And then, it eventually progressed into last year where I was doing an inning at home. I did some road series. Both those guys got some time off, so I was doing some road series. And then, unfortunately, like I said, Ed got sick, and I filled in, and here we are. So, it's a long riding wave of a path that if someone asked me, hey, what path would you use? I'm like, well, heck if I know, because this is my path, and it's going to be a lot different than your path. But, you just got to get into there, and you got to do what feels right for you at that point. And I can't sit here and tell you that, okay, here's what you need to do. You need to go to this school. You need to do this internship. You got to do this. Then you got to say, okay, well, let's go to the top 40 radio, and then let's get back to Chicago. I mean, you can't do it. I mean, your guys' path, I'm sure, is completely different than mine, and it's supposed to be that way. That's how you getting experiences along the way that are allowing me to tell you these stories of things that I've picked up along the way. And for all the craziness, for all the quote unquote successes, and for all the quote unquote disappointments, I've got a smile on my face, because those are stories that I will cherish and I will keep with me.
And along the way, you've gotten to see some cool things, even in the interim between the Padres and the White Sox. You had an opportunity to call some Loyola basketball just before, Loyola would have this legendary run. Sister Jean becomes a great celebrity. Did you have an inkling kind of calling those games that year that, hey, later on in March, this team could be dangerous? And they also broke my heart because I'm a Tennessee graduate, so they broke my heart in that round. But did you kind of have a feeling that this would be a special year for those guys?
I was around the team only a few times. I mean, I actually filled in here and there on the TV broadcasts. I used to do their radio games before I left for San Diego. I did every radio game home and away, and then, moved away, so they hired somebody else. And then, they did some TV stuff, and they already had some people in place, but there were some times where there were conflicts, and I had to fill in. And I'm still very close with the university. A couple of my really good friends still work over there, so I got a chance to sit in there and do a couple of games. And, you could tell there was something going on. I mean, I don't think I could ever tell you that I would have ever expected them going to the Final Four. I'm happy that they did. I mean, I tell you what, this city, Chicago, really gravitated to that team. I mean, it was amazing to see the support that this city gave that team. I mean, there are buildings here that are normally reserved for let's go Hawks or go Cubs or go Sox or go Bears that were go Ramblers, and it was the top of the Sears Tower was lit up in maroon and gold. I mean, it's just like, this is pretty cool. But I've seen a lot of interesting things along the way, and that being one of them, of course. And, getting a chance my first year in San Diego with the University of San Diego, getting to the tournament and upsetting Connecticut in the first round in Tampa. I'm like, okay, well, this is kind of cool. I don't think I've ever really signed up for this, but hey, let's keep it rolling, And that first year in San Diego, I got to call one of the greatest games I think I've ever seen and called, the game 163 between the Padres and the Rockies, where Matt Holliday still hasn't touched home plate. Not that I'm still bitter, but it was one of those kind of things. You get to experience all these great things along the way.
It's funny that year, too, the year of Loyola, they came to Florida and beat the Gators, and everyone was in a panic in the regular season. It was November, and everyone was saying, how could you lose to Loyola? Lo and behold, they go on that run. But being a Chicago guy, how heavily influenced when it came to basketball were you by Jim Durham? I grew up listening to him on ESPN radio and the NBA playoffs, the NBA finals. How much did he grow on you throughout the years?
That is my guy. For basketball, he was the man. And he never, ever got his due as far as I was concerned. I thought he was one of the best basketball play-by-play guys on the radio that I still, to this day, have ever heard. Just the description, the authoritativeness of his voice, the cadence, the pacing. I hear myself saying foul line extended left, and it's him. That's him. Rimming, no, that's him. And it's all coming out of me because I heard the guy do it for so many years, listening to Bulls games at night. And, I mean, he was one of those guys that I so enjoyed listening to games that he did just because of the energy and just the whole style that he brought to the table. And I really wish things would have worked out for him with the Bulls. He only got to see the one NBA championship, and then there were some contract issues that basically led him out to ESPN radio. I think he did some stuff with Dallas for a little while as well. And unfortunately, really passed away at a young age. I mean, I met him in passing one time, never really got a chance to really thank him and tell him how much I enjoyed what he did. And I regret that. But, at the same time, I think that there's a lot of us, that grew up in this area or grew up listening to him that carry on those traditions and some of the verbiage that he used. And I smile every time I hear myself saying it, just because I know exactly where it's coming from. It's coming from my one earpiece radio, listening to the game at night on the West Coast when my parents think I'm asleep, and I'm listening to the basketball game on the radio. So I can't help but smile. But yeah, you're right. Jim Durham, to me, one of the best.
And you mentioned his description. Let's get to baseball on the radio. And I've asked this to multiple baseball guys, and I like selfishly to stack up their answers and just kind of compare and contrast. How descriptive do you like to get on a baseball radio call? What is the line of enough and too much?
That's a really good question. With radio obviously being different than TV, you don't have to be as descriptive obviously on TV because you can see it. But on radio, I like to try to paint the picture as best as I possibly can. I don't like to go completely overboard one way or underboard the other way. I try to. I know it sounds like a cop-out, but I try to keep it as in the middle as I can. I like to tell you what direction he's moving. If the shortstop is moving to his left or his right. Off balance throw, if he's jump throw, I like to say jump throw. So that way, if the listener knows that it's a jump throw, it might not be a good throw to first, and then that sets up the dugout skillfully at first base by Abreu. So it kind of all goes hand in hand. I like to, I don't like to flower it up a little bit. I like to kind of keep it to the basics where, I feel like listeners, they're smart people. I don't think they want to be overstimulated. I don't think they want to be understimulated. I think they just want enough to make sure that they can see it in their minds. And that's what I try to picture that. It's interesting. Somebody asked me who I picture when I do the broadcast, and I picture a dad and a kid in a car driving around in the middle of nowhere using a baseball game as a talking tool between the two of them, learning life lessons, life experiences, and that kind of thing. So I like to do a little teaching during the game. With the help of my color commentator, obviously, if there's a rule that happens in the game, you can't assume that every time someone turns on the radio that they're baseball fans. They're captive audience members in the car, that don't want to be there and they don't want to listen to this game, but they're forced to listen to the game. So you may as well teach them something. If they're sitting there listening, you may as well let them know that the infield fly rule is this, or that. Ball four is a walk or whatever. Ground rule double is a ball that bounces here or gets trapped here. So, I like to do a lot of teaching, but at the same time, that's where the storytelling comes in because, I was fortunate enough to grow up around baseball with my grandfather and my father. I played it just enough to love it and enough to know that I couldn't do it for a living and wanted to be around it. So luckily for me, I had this other opportunity to stay in the game. But that's the kind of people I listen to. I think that are listening to the game. It may be completely different, but that's the I have it in my head. I even have it down to the station wagon with wood paneling. It's because that's what my dad had at the time. So I kind of picture it. It's almost like picturing myself and my dad in the car, driving. What did we want to hear? Well, we wanted to hear about our favorite players. We wanted to hear some information about our favorite players. We wanted to know how our favorite players were doing. We wanted to know how the Cardinals were doing because we hated the Cardinals. That's just kind of the way it is. So, I adapt that obviously to each city that I've broadcast in each side of town here in Chicago that I've broadcast in. But I try to keep it, not to the point where it's fluff, but I don't want to undersell anything because to me it's really important for you as a broadcaster, especially in baseball and radio. They're not there. You have to be the eyes. You've got to be the ears. I like to notice things. That a lot of people don't notice if there's like a glove exchange or if there's guys in the dugout messing around or, those are the kind of things you can't see if you're sitting in your car. And I like to let the people see that.
That's a really delicate balancing act, and it's also a balancing act, storytelling like you mentioned, while also on radio, including your radio analysts, and especially with the guys you've worked with, some real legends of this business, Ron Santo, Jerry Coleman, now with DJ coming up with the White Sox. How do you try to balance, telling a cool story about Tim Anderson's first glove when he was a kid in Alabama versus making sure you're not going on and DJ's being silent?
Yeah, so I try to relate things back to him. If we talk about Tim Anderson's first glove, I'm going to say, hey, what was your first glove? Who was the first model? I'll give you a perfect example. We were in Detroit, and Al Kaline came to the booth before he passed away and asked us if we wanted balls signed by him. And Darren knew him from all the travels, and I had never met him. And he introduced me to Al Kaline. And the very first wooden baseball bat I had was an Al Kaline model. And I bat left-handed, and I throw right-handed. And I started telling him the story. I'm like, hey, my dad got this for me for my birthday. I think I was 7 or 8. It was the first ever wooden bat I had, and it was an Al Kaline model. And he got a big kick out of it. If he didn't, he was pretending like he did, and it was nice. So, during the game, I wrote down on my scorebook, I wrote down Al Kaline. And I started talking about it. And, DJ had heard the story, but then I took it a step further. I said, what was the first model of bat you had? What was the most success you had? Who signed your glove? Who was, did you ever get an autograph? I mean, you can go so many different ways with that once you get into that story, because, know the ending, because that certainly helps, especially if there's a double play turn with one out. You can get out of it pretty quickly. But, there's a lot of ways you can go with it, and a lot of ways you can incorporate your guys. It was a little tougher with Jerry because we were very generationally far apart. And he liked to talk about Yogi Berra and Mickey Mantle. And, hey, he was around those guys. He was actually roommates with Mickey Mantle on the road. And, I was more in the Tony Gwynn, Bill Madlock, Rick Monday kind of area. And, DJ and I are around the same age. And we have luck that he played in San Diego and played with a bunch of guys that I know from San Diego. We have Tony Gwynn in common. And, we both knew Tony very well and called Tony a friend. So there's always a way to go to get DJ to talk about Tony. I don't ever have to get DJ to talk. I mean, DJ is very comfortable up there. DJ is really good at what he does. I mean, he is an expert at breaking down a play, calling out a player without really calling him out. And his play-by-play is getting really good, too. And, he's going to do some play-by-play during the games that we're going to broadcast this year as well. So you got to know your guy. I mean, you have to know your guy, first of all. And, I mean, I couldn't sit there and tell a story about somebody that Jerry Coleman had never heard of and expect him to be with me. So I kind of had to gear things to things that he would understand or he would know. And, every once in a while, and I'm sure you guys have done this too, you got to change the players of the game. You got to change the people that are in your story to make it fit to what that person is. So I've done that a couple of times. But, the moral of that is just to get the story and the information out and do it as best you can. And, as sometimes as quickly as you can, sometimes as long as you can.
Let's talk preparation for a few minutes. For you, say if it's a typical Monday night game between the White Sox and the Twins, it's a home game. Kind of what's your day look like from the time you get up to the time you're done?
Are we talking no pandemic or are we talking just normal?
Yeah, let's go no pandemic for right now.
Okay, let's go no pandemic, because pandemic is, as we pointed out a little bit earlier, it's kind of wrecking some preparation for a lot of people. But I usually try to get to the ballpark anywhere between 4.5 and 5 hours before the game. There's just something to me so serene about being at a ballpark on a game day with nobody in it, knowing that pretty soon that the stands are going to be filled and players are going to be showing up. And I like to formulate my plan kind of during the day. I'll wake up. I won't. I'll sleep a little bit just because maybe we've been on the night before or just got back from a road trip or whatever. Yeah, I definitely will get up and look at the internet when I wake up. Twitter's becoming a really good resource for stuff. If you follow the right people, you got to make sure you're following those of us that have the blue check marks that were in blue check mark hell the last couple of days. Unfortunately, I just got my Twitter account back today, guys. It's been 2 days without it. I was going through withdrawal, but it's important to follow the right people and know where to go for your information. I don't like to overload it, but I like to at least have a grasp on what's going on around the league that day, especially if it's later in the season, what the playoff implications are like, if we're getting toward a trade deadline, what are the rumors. I'm not going to broadcast rumors because it's just not what we do, but I'll get that stuff down to me. And sometimes I'll even jot it down in note form on my scorebook before there's any lineups in it. And I just try not to make sure that my scorebook is filled with all that stuff because, early on in my career, it was interesting because I would always be like this, looking at my scorebook for the next note. And somebody wisely put it to me after seeing me do it. They said, "How's the game in your book looking?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "Game's not there. Game's out there." I'm like, yeah, you're right. So, a lot of times now what I'll do is I'll just put a couple of words and it jogs my memory. So if I want to tell a Tony Gwynn story about an airplane flight that I had with him, I write Tony Gwynn airplane or TG airplane. And that way I can go, boom, oh yeah, Tony Gwynn airplane. And, now I've got that in my head. There's certain things you're going to have to look down for. I mean, statistics and things of that nature, you're going to have to look away for a few moments. But, nowadays with the advent of, spin rates and velocity and barrels and, launch angles and things of that nature, I will spend a lot of time on the Baseball Savant site, just to make sure that I am kind of familiar with the repertoires of the pitchers that we're facing. Sometimes, they're new to the league. Sometimes they're just new to me. And I want to know that, he relies 50% on his fastball. I want to know that 10% more of the time it's a cutter. I want to know what the velocity is, and just so I can get familiar with it, calling it, so I don't have to look down to see at 96 miles an hour, that's his fastball. And at 92, that's not a slider, it's a cutter. So that way, if I can look at if I can get that enough into my head, I can look at the speed gun and kind of have an idea of what the pitch is that day. We won't know the lineups at that point, but there are certainly guys that are having great seasons, or somebody that's been in a slump. I can go back and look that up. I will, in fact, go back and look that up. I want to make sure that I know that Tim Anderson is 17 for his last 35 and 3 home runs. Okay, I mean, I'd say that exactly, but I'll say he's hitting over 500 in his last 6 games, and he's hit 3 home runs. So I'll try to economize that. I try not to overload with stats because, again, I picture that guy in the car driving like this, going, wait, what was that? You can't absorb that when you're driving. So I like to try to get the stats done into story form to make them bigger or smaller than they actually need to be. So I'll do a lot of that. Once I get to the ballpark, I scour through the notes, the game notes, the stat packs, and the biggest thing that teams do in Major League Baseball now are put out the newspaper clippings from each day. So I can go, if we're playing the Tigers, I can go to the Tigers press box website and look at all the clips and see what the beat writers are saying, because the beat writers are the guys that are around there all the time. I could talk to our broadcasters. They may have a different view of what the beat writers have, because that's their job, is to kind of be on the beat, right? So I want to see what they're saying, and maybe take a couple of notes on that, and then maybe go and ask one of them, or go ask one of the broadcasters what's the deal on this. So I want to have information about the other team. I don't want to make it completely White Sox centric, but at the end of the day, the White Sox are paying me, and White Sox fans are listening to me. But I think that baseball fans are certainly still interested in what guys are doing on the other team, especially if they're in your division. This year it's going to be all division games, so you want to know if who got traded, or who is not there, or who's hurt, or whatever. So I try to make that as big of a balance as I can. And again, I don't want to get too scripted. That was my problem early on, because I felt like I had to write everything down. I had to be on every story. I had to be on. You learn as you go on that some of these things are what they call evergreen, which means they last. There's no date to them. So I can write down a Tony Gwynn airplane story because I want to get to it that day and not have time for it, and go, oh, okay, I didn't have time. Yeah, that'll hold up tomorrow. There's no dates involved with that. So I can just pick that up and move it over to the next day and not have any qualms about doing it. Listen, there's some games that are tough to call because the game stinks, or it's just you're not feeling right, or your partner's not into it. Those are the days you got to have all that extra material to have. There are some days where the game just calls itself because it's a great game. There's a lot of action. There's great defensive plays. There's good strategy. And you don't have to go to any of that stuff. But I would rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. So I'm going to go and prepare like I'm going to need it. And that way it kind of sits in my brain. I'm a visual learner. So if I look at it, I need to write it back down so that way it sinks in. People have given me a lot of crap about the color codes that I use for things. And, I have what Ted Leitner used to call mission control in front of me. I've got my computer in one spot. I've got my iPad in another spot. I got my cell phone here, and he's like, well, what are you going to do? Launch rockets? I'm like, well, no, I'm just going to launch in baseball knowledge. That's what I'm doing here. 3, 2, 1, blast off. Let's go. So, you can't get too crazed with that stuff. But, at the end of the day, you're there to call a game. Make sure you're doing that before you do anything else.
How important is it, too? You said not to overload the broadcast, but even on radio to have 10, 12 seconds of nothing, just crowd. Now, this year, it's going to be manufactured nothing. It's going to be fake crowd noise. But on a normal year, on a July summer day, you hear the popcorn vendor. You just hear the rumble of the crowd. How important on radio specifically is maybe just that 10, 12 seconds of not saying anything?
It is huge, because I'm sure you guys grew up listening to games on the radio. And you'd flip the switch on and you turn the radio on, and you'd hear the murmur, you'd hear the ballpark ambiance, and your announcers aren't saying anything. Yeah, you want to know what the score is, but at the same time, you're like, oh, cool, it's a baseball game. You knew exactly what it was when you turned it on. So I don't ever have a fear of not talking over that stuff, because people are smart enough to know that it's not dead air. It's just a baseball game. It's the sounds of the game. And I think it's so important. When I teach that class in play-by-play, especially for baseball, I say, guys, don't feel like you have to cover every single second of every game with information. You are going to bore to death your listener, even if you're the best at it. You're just gonna drive them nuts because they're gonna be like, oh my God, mercy, give me a break. And we talk about letting the game breathe, and that's pretty much what we mean by saying, all right, just lay out for a second. There's nothing wrong with sitting back. I mean, we're on the air 3 hours, sometimes 3.5. You need a break too, right? So just kind of sit back and go, cool. And if there's something funny happening, like there's a couple of in Chicago on both sides of town, there's a couple of guys that sing, vendors that are just like very sing-songy, and they have great sales pitches and stuff like that. So you hear it, and that gives you a whole other topic to talk about because you can hear it, and the fans at home can hear it. Why not? Go for it. I mean, it's again, you want to bring as many people into the broadcast and into the stadium with you as you possibly can, whether you're at home or on the road. And obviously this year it's going to be a lot different than that, but still, my objective is to make them feel like they're in our booth or in our stadium when a game is going on, because that's what we're there for.
And final one for me, how much have you thought of over the years just voice and how much your voice does change throughout the years? Baseball is a much different pitch. It's a much different pace than much other sports. Mm-hmm. Is that something you're conscious about in the back of your mind, is what your voice sounds like, your pacing, your tempo, all of that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was telling somebody this the other day, and people that aren't in this business don't understand it. So you go to a road ballpark and we have a road engineer rather than our home guy that doesn't travel. And I put the headsets on, do a test or to record a pregame show, and I just don't sound right. You guys know when you sound the way you want yourself to sound in a headset, even if it's a different headset, you're thrown off a little bit by that. And it's just like, man, I mean, am I a diva here? Am I a prima donna? I mean, what's going on here? But at the same time, that's where your comfort level is, when you can hear yourself sounding the way you think you sound. So that's one. Two, yeah, I mean, doing basketball in the off season and doing baseball during this season is a great thing, because I look at baseball and basketball as complete broadcast opposites with the pace. I mean, basketball is a whole lot of action and 10 seconds of story, and then more action, and then 10 seconds of story, and then more action, and then baseball is no action, 10 seconds of action, no action, 10 seconds of action. So believe it or not, my storytelling ability was really birthed during basketball games that I was doing by myself, because I had the time in a timeout to tell a quick story. I knew how to start it. I knew how to end it. And there was so much more I wanted to say, but I didn't have time. So I took that over to the broadcast booth in baseball, and I'm like, oh, okay, now I got 2 more outs to tell this story. This is cool. I can give you all the details. But yeah, it's really important to understand, the pacing that you present in baseball, especially because of the lulls in the game. Don't put yourself to sleep. Don't be so boring that you're calling a golf match, because you're not. It's not, it's not whispering. It's not getting like this. It's, it's just talking like you and I are talking right now. I mean, it's just two guys having a conversation in a radio booth about a baseball game that's going on, and then you got to get into it because something happens. So you have to. I always tell these guys in our classes that you should use your voice to your advantage and use it as an instrument, and what I mean by that is get up when it's supposed to get up, get down when it's supposed to be down, be equal pace when you need to be equal pace, and you can tell the guys that know what they're doing. It doesn't sound weird going from this to this, because it's all in that same flow. And I tell these guys, and it's so hard to get into their brains about trying to make a name for yourself with a screaming, ridiculous call. And I'm like, first of all, you're going to kill your voice. Second of all, no one's going to be able to understand anything that you've just said because of all the processing that goes on between your microphone and the airwaves. And yeah, you may get 10 seconds of glory, but you know what? You're a punchline now. You're not being looked at because you're making a great call. I mean, the boom goes the dynamite guy. I mean, we all know who that guy is, right? I mean, we've seen the video, but who says that? I mean, you say it as a punchline. You don't say it as, hey, that was great. I mean, okay. And, I don't blame the kid. I mean, he was nervous and whatever happened. But at the same time, you try to do it as professionally as you possibly can. Yeah, there are going to be times you're going to get outside of your own vocal ability, and you'll know it. It happened to me last year on an Eloy Jimenez home run at Wrigley Field. My voice cracked a little bit because I forced it a little bit. And I went back and listened to the call, and it was a decent call, but I was kind of kicking myself. Like, hey, you could have made that a lot better. You didn't have to force that. So even now, after you're doing it a long time, you're very critical of things like that, and you know the principles, but sometimes it's just hard to execute your own advice.
Out on this, we've talked before about kind of paying it forward in broadcasting. You mentioned some of the work you've been doing with some students, and also you do some really great articles that I encourage everyone to check out on Barrett Sports Media, doing the anatomy of a broadcaster, breaking down why Al Michaels, Jim Nantz, Bob Costas, Kevin Harlan are so good. Just how much do you enjoy kind of studying broadcasting in that way and getting to pay it forward to the next generation?
It's incredible. I mean, there were a lot of guys along the way in my career that took a lot of time that they probably didn't have or didn't want to take to make sure that I was taken care of. And you don't forget that. I mean, you do not forget that by thanking them profusely, first of all, and by not taking somebody else under your wing, or at least being available if somebody wants to ask you a question or whatnot. So, I mean, that part of it came pretty easy to me, because I was like, you know what, I may not be in this position again, and I want to. If someone likes what I'm doing, I want to help them. I mean, I'm as much as I can. I mean, I can't do it for them, but I mean, at least I can try to give them a little helpful advice along the way. As far as those articles are concerned, I was amazed at Jason Barrett, who owns the website, kind of said to me, "Why don't you do a series on what makes some of the best broadcasters the best broadcasters?" I'm like, okay, this is interesting. So, started off with Al Michaels, and went to Jim Nantz after that, and did Bob Costas after that, and then this week's was on Kevin Harlan. The first 3 articles, believe this or not, I got emails and phone calls from all 3 of those guys. Oh, wow. Al Michaels sent me an email that I didn't think it was Al Michaels, so I ignored it. And I ignored it to the point where the next week I got an email from NBC Universal Sports Public Relations saying, "Hey, Al Michaels is trying to get a hold of you." I'm like, "Oh, I guess I better get back to him." So I got back to him and I explained the story to him and got a kick out of it. And then out of the blue, I get an email from Jim Nantz asking me for my phone number. And I spent about 15 or 20 minutes talking to Jim Nantz from the press box at Guaranteed Rate Field a couple of weeks ago, and finding out how appreciative these guys are. I mean, I think of these guys as the best of the best, the creme de la creme of American sports broadcasting, guys that have seen everything and done everything, Super Bowls, World Series, Olympics. I mean, you name it. And yet these guys are still so salt of the earth that they're reaching out to somebody that they don't really know, but they know has some credentials in the business, nothing like theirs, but to reach out and say thanks. I mean, I can do that. If I think I'm too above that, well, who the hell am I? I mean, these guys have done everything, and they're reaching out and saying, "Hey, I really appreciate it. My family liked it." Bob Costas reached out. I'm waiting for Kevin Harlan. I don't want him to break the streak here. Now, there's a lot of pressure on Kevin Harlan that he doesn't really realize, but I kid about that. But it was really nice to see that kind of come back at me a little bit. And writing those articles has been a labor of love. I mean, it's a lot of work, and sometimes I don't have a lot of time to dedicate to it because I'm getting ready for a baseball season. But to compliment this nothing, because these are some of the people that I listened to and looked at and said, okay, I like that. I'm going to try to incorporate that. Or, yeah, this is awesome. Hey, this guy is rising to the occasion. I mean, the Jim Nantz thing at the Masters in 2019 when Tiger Woods won the tournament again, he laid out for 2 minutes and 42 seconds. You know how long 2 minutes and 42 seconds is in broadcast? You guys know the temptation to jump in there and say something stupid when the pictures are telling a great story at that point. He laid out, and I was like, I'm in admiration. I got to write this down. So, yeah, those have been a lot of fun to do, and it's been great to be able to connect with some of those guys, and it's also been great to connect with a lot of students and guys that are doing minor league broadcasting and college broadcast. I mean, I love it. I love talking. This is a passion of mine. If you couldn't tell, I love talking about it. And if someone seeks the help out, I mean, who am I to tell them that they can't get my help? I mean, it's just if I have the time or when I have the time, I do.
Well, we certainly appreciate the time you've given us over this past hour as we're getting ready for opening day for the Chicago White Sox, and we just wish you the best of luck coming up with the Sox this season on the radio, and just thank you so much for joining us. It's been perfect. Thank you.
Roger, Kyle, thank you very much for the time. Really appreciate it, and the best of you guys going forward here.
All right,
Thanks,
thank you. That is Andy Masur of the Chicago White Sox and WGN Radio. Catch him starting next week for White Sox baseball on the radio, and we'll be back next week with you as well, getting ready for another episode of Broadcaster Hour. Thanks, everyone.